A poor waitress shelters 20 freezing bikers in the rain, never imagining what the Hell's Angel would do next. It's the middle of a thunderstorm. Her diner's empty, her lights are flickering, and she's just trying to make it through another lonely night. When 20 roaring motorcycles pull up outside. Everyone in town says these men are dangerous, but when one of them collapses in the cold, she makes a choice that changes everything. She opens the door. Inside, the air fills with tension, and something unexpected. Kindness. They call her Ma'am. They fix her lights. They pray before eating. But as the storm breaks, sirens flash outside, accusing them of a crime they didn't commit. Now the whole town's against her. Her faith's on trial. And the man she risked everything for may be hiding a truth that could shatter it all. Was she saving sinners or welcoming danger into her home? And when the truth finally comes out, will grace still be enough to save them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The November wind howled through Willow Bend like a mournful cry, driving sheets of icy rain against the windows of the Crossroads Cafe. Inside, Darlene Jacobs moved her cleaning cloth in slow circles across the worn counter, the familiar motion doing little to calm her troubled thoughts. The diner's ancient fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the empty booths that had seen better days. She paused at the counter's end, her hand resting on a stack of papers she'd been avoiding all day. Bills. So many bills. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the corner of a coffee-stained cup, revealing the bright red warning notice from the electric company. The words, "Final notice," seemed to mock her in the dim light. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm, "I could really use some help right about now." Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle in their frames. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly, its red glow painting watery shadows across the empty parking lot. Darlene watched the rain hammer down, creating rivers in the cracked asphalt. In all her 25 years running the cafe, she'd never seen a storm quite like this one. The clock on the wall showed 8:45. 15 minutes until closing, though she hadn't served a customer in over 2 hours. Who would venture out in weather like this? She began counting the register, her shoulders slumping at the day's meager earnings. That's when she heard it, a low rumble, different from the thunder. The sound grew louder, mechanical and threatening, until it filled the air with its roar. Through the rain-streaked windows, Darlene saw headlights pierce the darkness, not one or two, but many. They came in a pack, 20 massive motorcycles, their chrome glinting in the storm. Her heart seemed to stop as the bikes pulled into her lot, filling the empty spaces. The riders were huge figures, dark and imposing in their leather jackets. As lightning flashed, she caught sight of the patches on their backs. Fallen Angels MC, and her blood ran cold. Everyone in Willow Bend knew about the Fallen Angels. They were an outlaw motorcycle club that operated throughout the state, though no one knew exactly what they did. Rumors ranged from drug running to protection rackets, but one thing was certain: they meant trouble. Darlene's hands shook as she hurried to the door, fumbling with the lock. The old defensive instinct, ingrained from years of working late nights alone, took over. As she twisted the deadbolt into place, a flash of movement caught her eye. One of the bikers had dismounted, taking an unsteady step forward. Even through the rain-blurred glass, she could see something was wrong. His movements were jerky, unnatural. He took another stumbling step, then crashed face first onto the wet pavement. The man didn't get up. His body began to convulse, shaking violently against the ground as the rain poured down. The other bikers were moving toward him, but too slowly. Darlene's hand hesitated on the lock. Every bit of common sense screamed at her to stay inside, to call the police, to protect herself. But 25 years of serving truckers, drifters, and lost souls had taught her something else. That sometimes the Lord's work came in strange packages. "Oh, Lord," she breathed, "please don't let me regret this." She unlocked the door and burst out into the storm. The rain hit her like needles, soaking through her uniform in seconds. She ran to the fallen man, her sensible shoes splashing through puddles. The other bikers froze, watching in stunned silence as this small, gray-haired woman grabbed their companion under the arms. "Help me get him inside!" she shouted over the storm. "He needs to get warm!" For a moment, no one moved. Then 2 massive men stepped forward, easily lifting their fallen brother. Darlene hurried ahead, holding the door open as they carried him in. "Bring him to the booth in the back," she called out, her waitress voice taking over. "I've got clean towels in the kitchen." The rest of the bikers filed in behind them, bringing the smell of wet leather and exhaust. They filled her small diner, their massive frames making the place seem even smaller. Water pooled on the linoleum floor beneath their boots. Darlene rushed to the kitchen, grabbing every clean towel she could find. When she returned, the sick man had been laid across a booth seat. His face was pale, his lips taking on a bluish tint. "He's diabetic," one of the bikers said gruffly. "Lost his insulin somewhere on the road. We've been trying to find a pharmacy, but everything's closed in this weather." Darlene thrust the towels at the nearest biker. "Start drying him off," she ordered, then turned to address the group. "All of you get those wet jackets off before you catch your death. There's coffee ready, and I've got soup on the stove. We'll figure this out together." She moved with purpose now, fear replaced by the familiar rhythm of caring for others. As she hurried to the kitchen to heat the soup, she sent up another quick prayer, this time in thanks, because even through her terror, she knew one thing for certain. No one should be left out in the cold. The sound of murmured voices and shifting leather filled the diner as the bikers began to settle in. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the Crossroads Cafe, something extraordinary was happening. Darlene Jacobs, widow and waitress, had just opened her door to 20 members of the Fallen Angels MC, armed with nothing but faith and a pot of hot coffee. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew in her heart it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, she thought, that's all you needed to know. The fluorescent lights hummed steadily overhead as she filled coffee cups and ladled out soup, her movements quick and efficient. The bikers watched her with a mixture of confusion and growing respect. This small woman who had dragged their brother out of the rain without a second thought. Through the windows, the neon sign continued to flicker, its light a beacon in the storm. Inside, the warmth began to spread, not just from the heating vents and hot coffee, but from something deeper, the simple act of human kindness on a cold November night. Steam billowed up from the wet leather jackets as the bikers crowded into the small diner, their massive frames making the space feel even more cramped than usual. Water dripped steadily from their clothes onto the worn linoleum floor, creating small puddles that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. The sound of heavy boots and low murmurs filled the air as they found places to sit. The largest among them, a man whose presence seemed to command the room without a word, removed his helmet with deliberate care. This was Jack's Hellfire Maddox, though Darlene wouldn't learn his name until later. His face was weathered, with deep lines etched around his eyes that spoke of hard miles and harder years. Those eyes, sharp despite their evident exhaustion, took in every detail of the diner as he ran a hand through his graying hair. "Would you Darlene's voice caught, and she had to clear her throat before continuing. "Would you all like some coffee? I've got a pot of stew that I can heat up too." She tried to keep her hands steady as she gestured toward the kitchen, but couldn't quite manage it. The tremor in her voice betrayed her nervousness, though she worked to mask it with the professional courtesy she'd developed over decades of serving customers. "Coffee would be real nice, ma'am," one of the younger bikers said, his voice surprisingly soft. The others nodded in agreement, their movements careful, almost cautious, as if they were trying not to frighten her. Darlene busied herself with coffee cups, the familiar routine helping to calm her nerves. She lined them up along the counter, the ceramic clinking gently as her shaking hands arranged them. The old percolator gurgled reassuringly as she started a fresh pot, its aroma filling the diner with a homey warmth that seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. As she moved between tables with the coffee pot, she was struck by their politeness. These men, with their leather vests and tattoos, their rough appearances that had so frightened her initially, said please and thank you with quiet dignity. They held their cups carefully, made room for her to pass, and kept their voices low. "Thank you kindly, Miss Darlene," one said, reading her name tag. His tone was respectful, almost gentle, and she felt something in her chest loosen slightly. The stew was reheated and served in sturdy bowls, steam rising into the cold air. Some of the men blew on spoonfuls carefully, others broke pieces of bread into the broth. They ate like men who knew hunger, appreciative of warm food on a cold night. Outside, the storm intensified. Thunder crashed overhead with such force that the windows rattled in their frames. The neon sign flickered once, twice. Then the entire diner plunged into darkness as the power failed completely. Darlene gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh dear," she whispered into the sudden blackness. "The candles are in the back, if I can just—" Before she could finish, several of the bikers were already moving. They went outside into the rain, and moments later the diner was bathed in an otherworldly glow as they positioned their motorcycles to shine their headlights through the windows. The light created long shadows and soft edges, transforming the humble space into something almost magical. In this gentle illumination, Darlene found herself near the counter with Jax Maddox. She was refilling coffee cups by feel more than sight, and her hands shook enough that the pot rattled against a cup's rim. Without a word, Jax reached out, his large hand steadying hers as she poured. "Thank you," she murmured, surprised by the gentleness of his touch. "No, ma'am," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you. Not many would have opened their doors to us tonight." Darlene set the pot down carefully. "Well, I couldn't just leave you out there in that storm, could I?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Most would have." They fell into conversation then, the kind that seems easier in the dark with rain drumming on the roof. Darlene found herself telling him about Tom, her late husband, who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam. "He used to say that the hardest part wasn't the fighting," she said softly, "but coming home to people who couldn't understand what he'd been through." Jax nodded, something in his expression shifting. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Darlene agreed, her voice thick with memory. "He really was." As the hours crept toward midnight, the storm continued its assault outside. But inside the diner, a different kind of atmosphere had developed. The bikers had settled into booths and chairs, their massive frames somehow less intimidating now. Some dozed, others talked quietly among themselves, while a few simply sat watching the rain through the windows. Darlene moved through the space, straightening things that didn't need straightening, more from habit than necessity. When she finally turned the lock in the door for the second time that night, she paused to look around her diner. 20 rough-looking men, members of the notorious Fallen Angels motorcycle club, were scattered throughout her restaurant, their breathing deep and even in sleep or near sleep. The headlights still cast their gentle glow through the windows, creating pools of light and shadow. In one, she could see Jax's profile as he sat guard near the door, his presence somehow reassuring rather than frightening now. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, her hands clasped tight against her chest. "I hope I did the right thing." The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the Crossroads Cafe, an unexpected peace had settled over the unlikely gathering of souls brought together by chance and storm and simple human kindness. The first hints of dawn crept through the rain-streaked windows of the Crossroads Cafe, painting the interior in soft grays and pale blues. The storm that had raged through the night was finally breaking, thunder now just a distant grumble beyond the hills. Darlene Jacobs stood at her usual spot behind the counter, watching as the morning light slowly revealed the aftermath of the previous night's unexpected shelter. Water puddles dotted the linoleum floor where the bikers' clothes and boots had dripped. Coffee cups and empty soup bowls were scattered across tables, and damp napkins lay crumpled here and there. But before Darlene could even reach for a mop, several of the fallen angels were already moving. "Ma'am," a burly man with a salt and pepper beard said, "where do you keep your cleaning supplies?" Darlene blinked in surprise. "Oh, you don't have to." "Please," another member chimed in, already gathering dishes. "Let us help." Within minutes, the entire group was engaged in cleaning. Some swept the floors while others gathered dishes and wiped down tables. Jax, Hellfire Maddox himself, was outside, examining the flickering neon sign that had been acting up. His large hands moved with surprising delicacy as he tightened connections and cleaned corroded contacts. A younger member discovered a loose door hinge and immediately set to work fixing it, the quiet squeak that had bothered Darlene for months disappearing under his careful attention. The diner was coming alive with activity, but not the kind she'd expected from a group of supposed outlaws. When Jax came back inside, wiping his hands on a rag, he approached the counter where Darlene stood. "Sign should work better now," he said, his voice carrying that same gentle rumble she'd noticed the night before. "The wiring was loose." "I really can't thank you all enough," Darlene started, but Jax was already pulling out a thick wallet. "No, ma'am. We're the ones who need to thank you." He started counting out bills. "For the food, the shelter, and your kindness." Darlene's hand covered his, stopping him. "You needed help, and that's that." Her voice was firm despite her soft tone. "I won't take your money." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or a recognition of the simple human dignity in helping others without expecting anything in return. The moment was broken by the distinctive sound of tires on wet gravel outside. Through the freshly cleaned windows, they could see a police cruiser pulling into the parking lot. Sheriff Tom Lancer stepped out, his face set in stern lines as he surveyed the motorcycles still parked in front of the diner. The morning light gleamed off his badge as he made his way to the door. The atmosphere in the diner shifted immediately. The bikers straightened, their faces becoming carefully neutral masks. Jax moved slightly, positioning himself between Darlene and the door, though he kept his stance relaxed. The bell above the door chimed as Sheriff Lancer entered. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "Morning, Darlene," he said, his voice carrying an edge beneath its professional courtesy. "Everything all right here?" "Just fine, Tom," Darlene replied, stepping out from behind the counter. "These gentlemen needed shelter from the storm last night." The sheriff's mouth tightened. Are you aware you're harboring known felons?" The words fell heavy in the quiet diner. Darlene felt her heart speed up, but she kept her voice steady. "They've caused no trouble at all. In fact, they've been helping clean up the place." "That so?" Sheriff Lancer's tone made it clear he wasn't impressed. "Well, there was a gas station robbery last night about 40 miles from here, and reports say a group of bikers was seen in the area." The tension in the room thickened. Darlene glanced around, seeing worried looks exchanged between the bikers. Some shifted uneasily, while others remained perfectly still, their faces carefully blank. "Nobody leaves," the sheriff announced, pulling out his phone. "I need to make some calls, verify some things." He stepped back outside, but remained visible through the windows, speaking into his phone while keeping one eye on the diner. Darlene's heart sank. Her simple act of kindness now felt like it had turned into a trap for these men who had treated her diner and herself with nothing but respect. She turned to Jax, who had moved closer to her. "We didn't do it," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers directly. "But I won't lie to you, Darlene. Our club, we've got a past. It gives law enforcement plenty of reason to assume we're guilty, whenever trouble happens near us." She studied his face. The lines of hardship etched there, yes, but also the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet dignity in his bearing. In that moment, Darlene made her choice. She believed him. Outside, they could see Sheriff Lancer pacing as he made call after call, his boots leaving impressions in the wet gravel. The morning sun was higher now, burning away the last of the storm clouds, but the atmosphere inside remained heavy with uncertainty. Finally, the sheriff returned to his car. Through the window, they watched him sit there for a long moment before starting the engine. As he pulled away, his expression was unreadable, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. The tension in the diner eased slightly, but didn't disappear entirely. Darlene looked around at these men who had fixed her sign, cleaned her floors, and treated her with nothing but respect. Her voice was quiet but firm when she spoke. "You can stay till this is sorted out." The words hung in the air, a simple offer that carried the weight of trust freely given. Through the windows, the morning sun caught the last remaining raindrops, making them shine like diamonds against the glass. Word spread through Willow Bend like wildfire. By mid-morning, a steady stream of cars drove past the Crossroads Cafe, slowing just enough for their occupants to peer through the windows. Mothers clutched their children closer as they hurried past. Old men in pickup trucks shook their heads disapprovingly. The whispers grew louder with each passing hour. Inside, Darlene tried to ignore the stares while she worked. The bikers had spread throughout the diner, finding ways to help. The rhythmic sound of hammering mixed with the coffee maker's gurgle as two of them fixed a wobbly table. Another group, led by a giant of a man they called Tank, was carefully repainting the faded trim around the windows. The bell above the door chimed frantically as Edith Harper burst in, her gray hair disheveled and her eyes wide with concern. "Darlene Jacobs, have you lost your mind?" Darlene set down her cleaning cloth with a sigh. She'd been expecting this visit. "Good morning to you too, Edith." "Don't you good morning me." Edith's voice quavered as she gripped her purse tight against her chest. "The whole town's talking. Margaret at the bank says they're dangerous criminals. Pastor Williams is beside himself with worry." "Lower your voice," Darlene said quietly, guiding her friend towards the counter. "They're right here, and they can hear you." Edith glanced nervously at the bikers, who were politely pretending not to notice her outburst. "That's exactly my point. Do you know what you're risking? Your reputation? Your business?" "My business?" Darlene gestured around the diner. "Look at what they're doing, Edith. Really look." For the first time, Edith seemed to notice the improvements. The windows gleamed. The old coffee machine that had been sputtering for months now hummed smoothly. Even the ancient ceiling fans spun without their usual wobble. But Edith lowered her voice to a whisper. "They're not what you think. These men—" "No," Darlene interrupted gently. "They're not what you think." As if to prove her point, a small commotion arose near the entrance. A young mother had paused outside with her little girl, who was pressing her face against the glass to watch Tank work. The huge biker noticed her and gave a friendly wave. The mother started to hurry away, but her daughter broke free and darted inside before she could stop her. "Can you really make balloon animals?" the little girl asked, pointing at the deflated balloons peeking out of Tank's vest pocket. Tank's weathered face broke into a warm smile. "Sure can, sweetheart. Would you like to see?" The mother rushed in after her daughter, fear written across her face. But before she could grab the child, Tank had already produced a bright red balloon and was expertly twisting it into shape. Within moments, a perfect balloon puppy sat in the delighted girl's hands. "What do you say?" the mother prompted automatically, her surprise evident. "Thank you, mister." The little girl hugged the balloon puppy close. Tank's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You're welcome, princess. Here's one for your mama, too." His huge hands moved with surprising delicacy as he created a perfect balloon flower. Darlene watched as the mother's tense shoulders slowly relaxed. She accepted the flower with a hesitant smile, and when she left with her daughter, her steps were no longer hurried with fear. "Well," Edith said, smoothing her skirt, "I suppose they do seem polite." The day continued, and the diner's transformation became more apparent with each passing hour. Jax coordinated the work efficiently, his quiet authority evident in the way the others looked to him for guidance. By late afternoon, the Crossroads Cafe looked better than it had in years. The fresh paint gleamed in the setting sun, and the repaired neon sign cast a warm glow across the parking lot. As evening approached, most of the bikers settled in to rest, spreading out across the booths as they had the night before. Darlene found herself in the kitchen with Jax, preparing a simple meal of meatloaf and potatoes. "Ma'am," he said softly as she handed him a plate, "I can't thank you enough for all this." "Please," she replied, meeting his eyes. "Call me Darlene." They sat together at the counter, eating in comfortable silence while the others dozed. The rain had started again outside, a gentle patter against the windows that made the diner feel like a sanctuary. Darlene watched Jax as he ate, noting how he kept his movements careful and contained, as if afraid of taking up too much space despite his size. "This is good," he said, gesturing to the food. "Reminds me of home cooking." "You have a home somewhere?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A shadow crossed his face. "Had? Long time ago." Darlene nodded, understanding loss when she saw it. They returned to their comfortable silence, but something had shifted. A quiet understanding, perhaps, or a recognition of shared pain. The peaceful moment shattered as red and blue lights suddenly strobed through the rain-streaked windows. The wail of police sirens filled the air, startling the sleeping bikers awake. Squad cars surrounded the diner, their headlights creating harsh shadows across the freshly painted walls. Darlene's heart pounded as she watched Sheriff Lancer step out of his cruiser. His face was set in grim lines as he approached the door, his right hand resting deliberately on his holstered weapon. Other officers fanned out behind him, their own hands hovering near their guns. The sheriff's voice boomed through the door. "Nobody move! You're all under investigation!" In that moment, all the progress of the day, the trust built, the kindness shown, the peace found, seemed to hang by a thread. Darlene looked at Jax, saw the resignation in his eyes, and felt her heart break a little at how quickly goodness could be swept away by suspicion. The rain continued to fall outside, its gentle sound now a stark contrast to the harsh glare of police lights and the tension filling the air inside the Crossroads Cafe. The sheriff's boots squeaked against the freshly mopped floor as he entered the diner. His deputies spread out behind him, hands hovering near their weapons. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across everyone's faces, making the scene feel like something from an old movie. "Hands where we can see them," Sheriff Lancer commanded, his voice steady but hard. Jax nodded to his men, and they all raised their hands slowly. One by one they lined up against the counter, their faces calm, but their eyes wary. Darlene watched from behind the register, her heart hammering in her chest. "Miss Jacobs," the sheriff said, his tone softening slightly. "We need to search the premises. Please step aside." Darlene moved away from the counter, wringing her hands in her apron. She watched as the officers began their methodical search, opening cabinets, checking under tables, rifling through the storage room. The bikers remained perfectly still, their cooperation clear in every movement. Deputy Wilson emerged from the back room, holding up a pair of black leather gloves. "Sheriff, look at these." Sheriff Lancer took the gloves, examining them closely. "These match the description from the gas station robbery. Care to explain?" "Those are mine," Jack said quietly. "Lost them about 3 weeks ago near Springfield. Must have fallen off my bike." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Convenient explanation." "It's the truth," Jax replied, his voice steady. "Check the size. They're extra large, custom made for my hands." Something in Darlene snapped. Maybe it was the defeat in Jax's voice, or maybe it was the memory of him carefully helping her steady the coffee pot the night before. Without thinking, she stepped between the sheriff and the bikers. "Tom Lancer," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I've known you since high school. These men have been nothing but respectful since they arrived. They've helped clean my diner, fix my equipment, and showed kindness to everyone who's walked through that door." The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "Darlene, I understand you want to believe the best in people, but nothing," she interrupted. "You're looking at a pair of gloves and seeing what you want to see. I'm looking at these men and seeing what they've shown me. Decency, gratitude, and respect." The diner fell silent. Even the deputies stopped their searching, watching the scene unfold. Jax stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Darlene with an expression of wonder. Sheriff Lancer sighed heavily. "We still need to take statements from everyone. Standard procedure." The next 2 hours dragged by as each person was interviewed separately. Darlene answered the same questions over and over, describing how the bikers had arrived, their behavior, their actions during their stay. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, the police were finally ready to leave. "You're free to go," Sheriff Lancer announced, "but don't leave town. This investigation is still ongoing." As the police cars pulled away, the bikers began gathering their things. The diner felt empty somehow, despite being full of people. Darlene could feel eyes on her through the windows, early morning customers, curious neighbors, people driving by slowly to get a look at the scene. Sunday arrived with a weight of expectation. Darlene put on her best dress, the blue one she saved for special occasions, and walked the familiar path to church. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. But something was different today. As she entered the sanctuary, the usual warm greetings were replaced with whispers and averted eyes. Her regular pew, third from the front, right side, stood empty, with people clustered awkwardly in the rows before and after it. She sat alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. After the service, Pastor Miller caught up with her in the courtyard. His kind face was creased with concern. "Darlene," he said gently, "could we talk for a moment?" They walked together toward the garden, where late autumn roses still bloomed against the church wall. "What you did," the pastor began, choosing his words carefully. "Showing kindness to those in need, that's admirable. Jesus himself ate with sinners and tax collectors." "But," Darlene prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But be careful not to lose yourself in the process," he finished. "Sometimes our desire to help others can lead us down dangerous paths." Darlene looked at the roses, their petals touched with frost, but still beautiful. "Pastor, when I saw that man collapse in the rain, I didn't think about danger. I thought about what Jesus would do, and I feel peace about that decision." The pastor patted her hand. "Just be careful, dear. That's all I'm asking." That evening, Darlene sat in her small house behind the diner, trying to focus on her Bible study but finding her thoughts wandering. A knock at the door startled her. Through the window, she saw Jax's tall figure standing on her porch, his motorcycle parked at the curb. When she opened the door, he removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "Evening, Darlene. Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she said, surprised by how glad she was to see him. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, ma'am. I noticed your roof's got some loose shingles. With winter coming, that could cause you trouble. I'd like to fix it for you, if you'll let me. Sort of a repayment for your kindness." Darlene studied his face in the porch light. "Why are you being so kind to me, Jax?" He was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "You gave me a reason to be." The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Darlene felt tears prick at her eyes, understanding that sometimes the greatest acts of faith were not grand gestures, but small moments of seeing the good in others and giving them the chance to see it in themselves. The crickets chirped in the darkness, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked. But on Darlene's porch, two unlikely friends stood in comfortable silence, each finding in the other a reminder that goodness could bloom in the most unexpected places. The days following the police investigation brought change to the Crossroads Cafe, as steady as the autumn wind that swept through Willow Bend. Each morning, Darlene would arrive to find members of the fallen angels already at work, their motorcycles lined up like soldiers in the parking lot. Today, Tank and two other bikers were perched on ladders, painting the cafe's exterior walls a warm cream color that made the building look fresh and inviting. The sharp smell of paint mixed with the crisp morning air as Darlene unlocked the front door. "Morning, Miss Darlene," Tank called out, his massive frame balanced surprisingly delicately on the ladder. Despite his intimidating size, he had the gentlest touch with a paintbrush, careful not to drip on the sidewalk below. Inside, Jax was on his back under the old jukebox, tools spread around him like fallen leaves. "Almost got it," he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. The machine had been silent for 3 years, ever since Jimmy Carter, the local handyman, not the president, as Darlene always had to explain, had declared it beyond repair. "You don't have to fix everything," Darlene said, setting a cup of coffee near him. Jax slid out from under the jukebox, his face smudged with dust. "Want to?" he said simply, reaching for the coffee. Their fingers brushed as he took the cup, and Darlene felt that same flutter of connection that had been growing stronger each day. The morning crowd started trickling in, more customers than usual. Some came for the coffee and pancakes, but others clearly arrived hoping to catch a glimpse of the notorious bikers. Darlene watched as curiosity slowly overcame fear. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop actually smiled when Tank held the door for her. Old Mr. Peterson, who'd been coming in for breakfast every day for 15 years, engaged in a lengthy conversation about classic motorcycles with one of the younger riders. Around noon, the jukebox suddenly crackled to life, filling the diner with Patsy Cline's sweet, sad voice. Several customers actually applauded, and Jax ducked his head, embarrassed by the attention. "Told you I'd get it working," he said quietly to Darlene as he washed his hands at the sink. She noticed the way his shoulders tensed when people looked at him, how he seemed more comfortable in shadows than spotlight. There was a story there, she knew, one that had carved deep lines around his eyes and left shadows in them. The afternoon lull provided a chance for them to talk. Darlene sat across from Jax in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee between them like a bridge. "You want to know why I'm here?" he said. Not a question, but a statement. Darlene waited, giving him space to find his words. "I served in the Gulf War," he began, his fingers tracing patterns in a small puddle of spilled coffee. "Came home with medals and nightmares. Sarah, my wife, she tried to help, but I pushed her away. Started drinking instead." He paused, taking a shaky breath. Darlene reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "One night, I was too drunk to drive. Sarah said she'd take us home. Tommy, our boy, was sleeping in the back seat. A truck ran a red light. I survived. They didn't." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Darlene's heart ached for the pain she saw in his eyes. "The club found me when I was at rock bottom," Jax continued. "They gave me purpose, brotherhood, saved my life, but not the right way. Led me down some dark roads trying to outrun the guilt." "But you're different now," Darlene said softly. Jax looked up at her, his eyes clear and honest. "Trying to be. Your kindness that night in the storm. It reminded me of Sarah. How she always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves." The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden stripes across the table. Outside, the sound of laughter drifted in as Tank showed a group of children how to make balloon animals, a skill he'd learned, he'd told Darlene, during a stint as a children's party entertainer before joining the club. Darlene watched the scene for a moment, then made a decision. "Stay for supper," she said. "All of you. We'll close early and have a proper meal together." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, 23 people gathered around tables pushed together, in the middle of the Crossroads Cafe. Darlene had cooked her mother's recipe for chicken and dumplings, with apple pie for dessert. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air, making even the toughest bikers smile in anticipation. Before they ate, Darlene did what came naturally. She bowed her head to pray. To her surprise, one by one, the others followed suit, some awkwardly, some with practiced ease, until every head was bowed. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice soft but steady, "thank you for bringing these friends to our table. Thank you for the reminder that family isn't always who we expect it to be. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it. Amen." "Amen," rumbled through the room, some voices rough with emotion. As they passed dishes around the table, conversation flowed easily. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and laughter, real, genuine laughter, echoed off the walls. Tank revealed more about his circus past, complete with demonstrations of juggling salt shakers. Another biker, who'd been silent for days, turned out to have a beautiful singing voice, and led them in an impromptu rendition of Amazing Grace. Darlene sat at the head of the table, watching it all. For years after losing her husband, she'd felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere. The diner had been her anchor, but not her home. Now, surrounded by these unlikely angels with their leather jackets and rough manners, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. She belonged. As the evening wore on and the pie plates were cleared, Darlene caught Jax watching her. His eyes held understanding, as if he too knew what it was like to find family in unexpected places. She smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time in years, felt truly, completely at peace. The late November chill crept through Willow Bend as Darlene stood at her diner window, watching leaves dance across the empty parking lot. Her breath fogged the glass as she traced frost patterns with her finger, mind wandering to the approaching holiday season. The sight of a young mother hurrying past with 2 small children, their coats threadbare, made her heart ache. She turned to find Jax watching her from the counter, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. Darlene wiped her hands on her apron, a small smile playing at her lips. "I was thinking about Christmas coming up. So many folks struggling this year." She paused, gathering her courage. "What would you think about hosting a free community meal night, open to anyone who needs it?" The suggestion hung in the air for a moment. Then Jax's face broke into a rare, genuine smile. "The boys and I could help," he offered. "Some of us actually know our way around a kitchen." Tank, who'd been fixing a wobbly table nearby, perked up. "I make a mean chili," he said proudly. "Secret recipe from my grandma." One by one, the other bikers joined in, offering skills and suggestions. Their enthusiasm warmed the diner more than any heater could. Over the next few days, word spread through town. Darlene posted handwritten notices on community boards and in church bulletins. "Community free meal night at the Crossroads Cafe. All welcome." She noticed people reading the signs, whispering among themselves, their expressions a mix of interest and uncertainty. The morning of the event arrived crisp and clear. Darlene unlocked the diner at 6 o'clock, finding the bikers already waiting outside, arms full of grocery bags. They transformed the cafe into a winter wonderland, stringing twinkling lights across the ceiling and windows. Tank's chili simmered in enormous pots, filling the air with rich, spicy aromas. Others baked cornbread, chopped vegetables for salad, and arranged desserts on the counter. Jack surprised everyone by producing boxes of Christmas decorations from his saddlebags. "Found these at a thrift store," he mumbled, almost embarrassed. "Thought they might help." Together they hung paper snowflakes and tinsel, their rough hands gentle with the delicate ornaments. Someone tuned the old radio to a Christmas station, and White Christmas floated through the air as they worked. At 5 o'clock, Darlene stood back to survey their handiwork. The diner glowed warm and inviting, strings of white lights reflecting off the windows like stars. The counter groaned under the weight of food: Tank's chili, golden cornbread, fresh salads, and an array of pies and cookies. The bikers had tied clean white aprons over their leather vests, an endearing sight that brought tears to her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. The first guests arrived hesitantly, an elderly couple who'd been coming to the diner for years. They paused in the doorway, taking in the transformed space and the lineup of tattooed servers. But Tank's welcoming smile and offer of hot chocolate soon had them settled in a booth, wonder replacing wariness on their faces. More people followed: young families, single mothers, elderly folks living alone, even a few teenagers who usually hung out behind the grocery store. The bikers moved among them with grace, serving food, refilling drinks, and making conversation. One burly member entertained children with stories while another helped an old woman cut her cornbread. Midway through the evening, Jax called for everyone's attention. He stood at the counter, his massive frame somehow gentle in the twinkling lights. "If you'll bow your heads," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet room, "I'd like to say grace." The silence deepened as heads bowed, creating an intimate moment in the crowded space. "Lord," Jax began, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for second chances. Thank you for showing us that love can come from unexpected places and that it's never too late to start over. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it. And bless Miss Darlene, who saw good in us when others wouldn't. Amen." For a heartbeat, silence held. Then applause broke out, starting soft and building to fill the room. Someone wiped tears from their eyes. A child laughed with delight. The tension that had separated townspeople from bikers dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew more festive. Stories were shared across tables, phone numbers exchanged, and promises made to return. Even Edith from the church stopped by, bringing an extra batch of her famous sugar cookies and staying to chat with a biker about their shared love of gardening. Near closing time, soft flakes of snow began drifting past the windows. Someone started humming "Silent Night," and others joined in. Soon the whole diner was singing, voices blending in the ancient carol. Darlene stood in the doorway to her kitchen, watching as candlelight flickered across faces both familiar and new, all singing together. The bikers' deep voices provided a gentle bass line to the melody, their faces soft in the golden light. Children perched on their parents' laps, eyes heavy with sleep and satisfaction. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the Christmas lights like tiny stars. In that moment, Darlene saw her diner as more than just a business. It had become a beacon of hope, a place where barriers fell and hearts opened. The once feared men in leather had transformed into angels of mercy, serving others with humble joy. The town's suspicion had melted into acceptance, proving that love could indeed work miracles. As the last notes of Silent Night faded away, she caught Jax's eye across the room. His smile reflected everything she felt: gratitude, peace, and the quiet joy of knowing they had created something beautiful together. Dawn broke cold and gray over Willow Bend, the previous night's joy shattered by the harsh morning news. Darlene was wiping down tables when she heard the television behind the counter crackle with breaking news. "Breaking news from the Missouri State Police," the announcer's voice cut through the quiet diner. "New evidence has emerged in the gas station robbery case. Fingerprints found on the getaway vehicle have been matched to Jax Maddox, leader of the Fallen Angels Motorcycle Club." The coffee pot slipped from Darlene's hands, shattering on the floor. She stared at the screen, watching security camera footage of a car speeding away from the gas station that terrible night. The reporter continued detailing how forensics teams had found multiple prints matching Jax's records from his military service. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. Regular customers called to cancel their standing orders. Mrs. Peterson, who'd been coming in for breakfast every Tuesday for 15 years, left a message saying she couldn't support a business that harbored criminals. Darlene's hands trembled as she swept up the broken glass. Outside, a crowd was gathering, their angry voices carrying through the walls. Someone shouted, "How could you let them fool you?" Another yelled, "They made our town look stupid." The sharp sound of spray paint being shaken made her look up. A teenager, face twisted with anger, was writing something on her front window. By the time she reached the door, the boy had run away, leaving behind bright red letters spelling "traitor" across the glass. 3 police cars pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. Sheriff Lancer stepped out first, his face grim. Behind him, more officers emerged with hands on their weapons. Darlene watched, helpless, as they surrounded the motel where the bikers were staying. The morning air filled with shouts and the sound of doors being kicked in. One by one, the bikers were led out in handcuffs. They didn't resist, but their faces were hard with anger and resignation. Tank, gentle Tank, who'd made balloon animals for children just days ago, kept his eyes on the ground. Last came Jax, his massive frame somehow diminished by the metal circling his wrists. When he passed the diner, his eyes met Darlene's through the vandalized window. She rushed outside, ignoring the hostile stares from the gathering crowd. "Jax!" she called out, her voice breaking. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't lie to me all this time." The sheriff tried to push her back, but Jax turned to face her. His eyes were clear and steady, despite everything. "Miss Darlene," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I swear on my son's grave, I didn't do this. Someone's setting us up. Those prints, someone planted them. You have to believe me." "That's enough," Sheriff Lancer growled, pulling Jax toward the patrol car. "Ma'am, step back. These men are under arrest for armed robbery and conspiracy." "Please," Jax called over his shoulder as they pushed him into the car. "Remember what you saw in us. Remember what's true." Darlene stood in the parking lot long after the police cars disappeared, the word traitor burning in her peripheral vision. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind whispers and judgmental glances. She went inside, turned the sign to "closed," and sank into a booth. The diner felt hollow now, haunted by memories of laughter and prayer from just hours before. The Christmas decorations they'd hung together seemed to mock her. She buried her face in her hands and wept, for Jax, for her own foolishness in trusting so easily, for the death of something beautiful she'd thought was growing in her town. Night fell early, as it does in December. Darlene sat alone in the darkened diner, unable to face going home. The crash of breaking glass made her jump. A rock sailed through her front window, followed by another. Shouts and laughter came from the street as more projectiles followed. Bottles, garbage, even a half-full can of paint that splattered across the floor. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, calling the only person she could think of. Edith answered on the second ring. "Darlene, are you all right? I saw the news." "They're throwing things," Darlene whispered, crouching behind the counter as more glass shattered. "Breaking my windows. I don't know what to do." "Oh, honey," Edith's voice was full of sympathy. Maybe this is a sign. You could sell the diner, move somewhere fresh, start over where people don't know about all this." "No." The word came out stronger than Darlene expected. "Faith isn't faith if it only stands when the sun's shining. Daddy taught me that, remember?" "But Darlene, I believed in them because I saw good in them. If that good was real, and I still believe it was, then running away won't help anyone." After the calls ended, Darlene found old plywood boards in the storage room. Her arms ached as she nailed them over the broken windows, but she refused to stop until every jagged hole was covered. The sound of hammering echoed through the empty street like a declaration of defiance. Finally, exhausted, she sat at her usual booth. Her old Bible lay on the table where she'd left it that morning, its pages worn soft with years of handling. She opened it with trembling hands, letting them rest on the familiar words. Tears fell onto the pages as she prayed, not for herself, but for truth to prevail, for hearts to soften, for the strength to keep believing in grace even when the world turned cold. In the darkness of her boarded-up diner, Darlene Jacobs clasped her hands over her Bible and whispered, "Lord, help me hold on to hope. Help me remember what you showed me about these men, and please, please let the truth come out." 2 weeks dragged by like years. Outside Darlene's shuttered diner, fresh snow blanketed the empty parking lot, pristine and untouched except for her own footprints leading to the front door each morning. The neon sign stayed dark, but she couldn't bring herself to take it down. Every morning she unlocked the door, swept the floors, and wiped down counters that gathered no crumbs. The silence pressed in on her like a physical weight. She missed the rumble of motorcycle engines, the sound of rough laughter, the way Tank would hum old hymns while fixing things. Most of all, She missed Jax's quiet presence at the counter, the way he'd helped steady her hands when they shook. Lord, she whispered one particularly lonely afternoon, scrubbing an already clean table. I know you have a plan, but I sure wish you'd give me a hint what it is. The town had mostly stopped throwing things, at least. Now they just pretended the diner didn't exist. Former regulars crossed the street to avoid walking past. Children no longer pressed their faces against the windows, hoping for a glimpse of the friendly bikers who'd made them laugh. Darlene kept the boards up on the broken windows, more to keep out the December cold than anything else. The inside of the diner looked strange in the dim light that filtered through the cracks, like a ship abandoned at sea, still waiting for its crew to return. She'd visited the jail twice, but they wouldn't let her see any of the men. Under investigation, the desk sergeant said each time, not meeting her eyes. She sent messages through their lawyer instead, simple words of encouragement, keeping the faith, praying for you all. That afternoon, as wet snow fell in heavy clumps outside, Darlene sorted through her mail at the counter. Bills, mostly, fewer now that the diner was closed, but still enough to worry about. Then her hands found a plain white envelope with no return address. Her heart quickened. The postmark was from 2 towns over. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. 2 things fell out: a photograph and a folded note. The photo made her gasp. It showed a security camera image, grainy but clear enough. A man at a gas station counter, wearing a familiar pair of leather gloves, the same ones the police had found, the ones that had helped convict Jax. But the face beneath the hat wasn't Jax's. This man was younger, thinner, with a distinctive scar along his jaw. The note was brief, written in a careful hand. Told you I didn't do it. Keep the faith. J. Darlene's legs went weak. She grabbed the counter to steady herself, staring at the evidence in her hands. Here it was, proof of what her heart had known all along. But how had Jax gotten this? How had he managed to send it? Questions could wait. She grabbed her coat and purse, not even bothering to lock up. The snow was falling harder now, but she barely noticed as she climbed into her old station wagon. The engine protested the cold, but finally turned over. The drive to the sheriff's office felt endless. Darlene's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. She rehearsed what she'd say, praying for the right words. The front desk deputy looked up in surprise when she burst in, snow melting in her hair. Mrs. Jacobs, can I help you? I need to see Sheriff Lancer, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Right now. It's about the Fallen Angels case. Ma'am, I don't think... Tell him I have evidence, please. Something in her tone must have convinced him. 5 minutes later, she sat across from Sheriff Lancer in his office. He looked tired, older than she remembered. Without a word, she placed the photograph on his desk. The sheriff picked it up, squinting. She saw the moment recognition hit. His eyes widened, and he sat up straighter. Where did you get this? It came in the mail today. Anonymous. She didn't mention the note. Some things were private. But look at his face, Sheriff. That's not Jax Maddox, and those are the same gloves you found at my diner. Lancer studied the photo for a long time. Finally, he sighed heavily. I know this man. Marcus Wheeler. Former member of the Angels who went rogue last year. We've been looking for him, but... He looked up at Darlene. This changes everything. The next few days passed in a blur. Forensics examined the photograph. Deputies tracked down security footage from other cameras. Wheeler's face appeared on wanted posters across 3 states. They caught him 4 days later, trying to cross the Canadian border. He confessed to everything. The robbery, planting evidence, even sending someone to vandalize the diner. He'd wanted revenge on the club for kicking him out. Darlene was in her kitchen when the call came. The fallen angels were being released. All charges dropped. She sat down hard in her chair, tears flowing freely as relief washed over her like a wave. The next morning, Sheriff Lancer appeared at her door. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot in the snow. "Mrs. Jacobs, Darlene, I owe you an apology, a big one." She waited, watching his face. "I've been sheriff here 23 years. Thought I knew everything about reading people, but you—" He cleared his throat. "Guess you saw something the rest of us couldn't. Something good in those men, when all we saw were criminals." "Not something good, Tom," she said softly. "Something human, that's all." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, whatever it was, you were right, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." "Thank you," she said simply. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." He smiled, looking relieved. "Yes, ma'am. I believe I would." They sat in her kitchen, steam rising from their cups, and talked about redemption, about seeing past surfaces, about the way Grace sometimes wore unexpected faces. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a clean, white blanket, like a fresh start, Darlene thought. Like hope made visible. The morning dawned crisp and perfect, with a sky so blue it made Darlene's heart ache. Not a single cloud marred the horizon as she unlocked the diner's front door, her hands trembling slightly. The winter sun sparkled off fresh snow, turning everything to diamonds. She heard them before she saw them, the familiar rumble of motorcycles approaching from the highway. 20 bikes, riding in formation, their chrome and steel gleaming in the morning light. The fallen angels were coming home. Townspeople began gathering on the sidewalks, drawn by the sound. Darlene recognized faces from church, from the grocery store, from all the places that had shunned her weeks before. They stood quietly now, watching, waiting. The bikes pulled into the parking lot, one by one, engines cutting off into silence. Jax dismounted first, removing his helmet. He looked different somehow. Lighter, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. When he walked toward the diner, he held his hat in his hands, almost like a prayer. "We're home, ma'am," he said softly as he stepped inside. His voice caught slightly on the words. Tears spilled down Darlene's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. The other bikers filed in behind him, each one nodding respectfully. Outside, the crowd still hesitated, uncertain. But then Jax turned and walked back out onto the porch, addressing them all with quiet dignity. "Breakfast is on the house today," he announced. "Everyone's welcome." There was a moment of stillness. Then someone stepped forward. Then another. And another. Soon, the diner was filling up with people, bikers and townspeople alike, sliding into booths together, sharing space and tentative smiles. Darlene moved through the crowd with her coffee pot, filling cups and wiping tears. She watched old Mrs. Peterson share her newspaper with Tank. Saw the sheriff's deputy laughing at one of the bikers' jokes. Watched her pastor shake Jax's hand with genuine warmth. The smell of pancakes and coffee filled the air as conversation and laughter grew louder. Here and there, she caught fragments of apologies being offered, acceptance being given. The miracle of forgiveness was unfolding right before her eyes, over bacon and eggs, one small moment at a time. In the days that followed, the Crossroads Cafe became more than just a diner. It turned into a symbol of hope for Willow Bend. News vans parked outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. Reporters with bright smiles and polished shoes crowded the counter, ordering coffee and asking questions. Small-town waitress shows Power of Faith, one headline read. Poor Waitress shelters bikers, restores town's faith, declared another. The story spread across social media like wildfire, touching hearts far beyond Missouri's borders. Donations started arriving, first in small envelopes, then in larger ones. People sent checks from as far away as California and Maine. Darlene stood in her kitchen, hands shaking as she opened letter after letter filled with kindness from strangers. "We're going to do something good with this blessing," she told Jax one morning. Together, they planned renovations, a new kitchen, more seating, better equipment. But the biggest surprise came from the fallen angels themselves. "We're starting something called the Darlene Run," Jax announced during breakfast rush hour. "A nationwide charity ride for homeless veterans, named after the woman who taught us about second chances." The weekend arrived bright and clear. Nearly half the town gathered to see the first ride off. Darlene stood on the diner steps, her heart full as she watched the crowd mingle with the bikers. Sheriff Lancer himself stepped forward to offer a blessing for their journey. "Lord, watch over these men as they ride for those in need," he prayed, his voice carrying across the quiet parking lot. The roar of 40 motorcycles filled the air. 20 fallen angels joined by 20 townspeople who'd decided to ride along. As they disappeared into the horizon, Darlene felt something settle in her soul, a deep, abiding peace that felt like coming home after a long storm. Winter melted into early spring, and the Second Chance Cafe, formerly the Crossroads, hummed with new life. Fresh paint gleamed on the walls, and cheerful red-checkered curtains framed spotless windows. The brass plaque by the door caught morning sunlight, its engraved words drawing smiles from passers-by. "When you shelter the storm, grace will shelter you." Darlene sat in her favorite booth, the one by the window where she could watch the sunrise paint the sky. Steam rose from her coffee cup as she gazed at the highway stretching toward the horizon. The dining room buzzed with the breakfast crowd, truckers, families, and locals all mingling together like they'd never known division. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of her phone, remembering the last text from Jax. The Darlene Run had raised thousands for homeless veterans, and motorcycle clubs across 3 states had joined the cause. Who would have thought that one stormy night could spark such change? The phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. Her heart stopped when she saw the name on the screen. Lynn Jacobs, her daughter. The same daughter who hadn't spoken to her since the funeral 5 years ago. Darlene's hands trembled as she answered. "Mom?" Lynn's voice cracked with emotion. "I saw you on the news." Darlene pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling up. "Lynn, honey. Those bikers, what you did for them. I watched the whole story." Lynn's words tumbled out, thick with tears. "You never stopped being who you are, did you? Even when I said your faith was blind, even when I blamed you for Daddy." She took a shaky breath. "You changed people, Mom. You changed me." Tears rolled down Darlene's cheeks as she listened to her daughter's voice, so familiar, yet softer now, free of the old anger. "I've missed you so much, baby. I know, I'm sorry. I was wrong about so many things." Lynn paused. Can I come visit next week?" "Yes," Darlene whispered. "Yes, please." After they hung up, Darlene stayed in her booth, watching the morning unfold through misty eyes. The sunrise had given way to a perfect spring day, and golden light streamed through the windows. She thought about that first rainy night when 20 rain-soaked bikers had stumbled through her door. How scared she'd been. How close she'd come to turning them away. Her gaze drifted to the open road, where the fallen angels had disappeared weeks ago. The highway stretched endless and bright under the morning sun, a ribbon of possibility leading to somewhere and everywhere. "Thank you, Lord, for the storm," she whispered, her heart full of gratitude. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes our greatest blessings come dressed in leather and rain. Outside, the neon sign of the Second Chance Cafe glowed steady and strong against the brightening sky. No more flickers, no more dimming. Just like the light of grace that had led them all home. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.